For 12,000 years, people lived in the cliffs above the Tigris River in southeastern Turkey. They carved caves into the limestone, hundreds of them, stacked in rows up the rock face like the windows of a building. Neolithic hunters used them first. Then the Assyrians came. Then the Romans, who built a fortress on the clifftop and named it Castrum Kepha, the castle of the rock. Then the Byzantines, who made it the seat of a bishopric. Then the Arabs. Then the Seljuk Turks, who built a palace. Then the Ayyubids, who built a mosque. Then the Mongols, who destroyed it. Then the Ottomans, who rebuilt it. Then the Kurds, who have lived there ever since. 20 different civilizations passed through the same cliffs, each one leaving something behind. Minarets, bridges, mausoleums, bathhouses, caravanserais, palaces, tombs. Over 300 monuments were documented within the town and its surrounding landscape. Thousands of Neolithic caves riddled the hillside. The 12th century Old Tigris Bridge, built in 1116, still had its piers standing in the river. The 15th century mausoleum of Zeynel Bey, covered in turquoise and navy tiles, sat on the opposite bank. The Erisk Mosque dominated the skyline, described by architectural historians as a masterpiece of craftsmanship. People had been living there for 12,000 years. Then, in 2020, the Turkish government flooded it. Before we dive in, this channel explores the hidden worlds buried beneath the surface. Hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. Until the water came, Hasankeyf was not a ruin. It was a living town. Roughly 3,000 people lived there, most of them Kurdish and Arab families who had been in the area for generations. Some still lived in the caves their grandparents had occupied. Others ran small cafes on stilts above the Tigris, serving tea to visitors who came to see the monuments. Shepherds moved their flocks through the canyons. Children played in the shadow of the medieval citadel. The town had barely changed between the 17th and 19th centuries, which gave it a quality that one conservation architect described simply as pure history. When she and her husband first visited in the early 1980s, the panoramic view from the citadel took in an expanse of history that was unbroken. From the Neolithic stairs cut into the cliffs to the cluster of cafes along the winding river below. Hasankeyf sat on the ancient Silk Road. For centuries, it had been a stopping point for traders moving goods between Mesopotamia and Anatolia. Its position on the Tigris made it strategically valuable to every empire that controlled the region. The Romans fortified it as a border garrison against Persia. The Ayyubids built it into a regional capital with mosques, madrasas, bathhouses, and bazaars. A medieval scholar named Ibn Shaddad, writing in the 13th century, described the lower town as containing a palace, a mosque, 3 madrasas, 4 bathhouses, tombs, caravanserais, and enough agricultural land to feed the entire population from year to year. Almost none of the buildings he described could be identified in the modern town, likely destroyed during the Mongol invasions that followed. But the caves endured, the bridge endured, the cliffs endured, and then they did not. The Ilisu Dam is a hydroelectric project on the Tigris River, built roughly 60 miles downstream from Hasankeyf. It is part of a vast regional development program called GAP, the Southeastern Anatolia Project, which includes 22 dams and 19 power stations across the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Turkish government has described the program as essential to developing the country's poorest and most underserved region. The Ilisu Dam alone was designed to generate over 4 billion kilowatt hours of electricity per year, roughly 2% of Turkey's total supply. The dam was first proposed in the 1950s. For decades, it existed only on paper. In the 1990s, the project gained momentum when the Turkish government began seeking international funding. A British construction firm, Balfour Beatty, joined an international consortium to build it. The World Bank was approached for financing, but declined to fund it. European export credit agencies from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland initially agreed to back the project, but withdrew in 2009, citing Turkey's failure to meet environmental and cultural heritage conditions. The Turkish government built it anyway. Construction began in 2006 with domestic funding. The dam wall rose to 453 feet. By 2019, the gates were closed and the reservoir began to fill. By April 2020, the water had risen to an elevation of 498 meters, covering the entire town. Hasankeyf is now underwater. The site met 9 of the 10 criteria for UNESCO World Heritage status, among the highest qualifications of any site in the world. But the Turkish government never applied for the designation. UNESCO recognition would have imposed international protections that could have blocked the dam. By declining to nominate Hasankeyf, Turkey ensured that no international body had the legal standing to intervene. Activists, archaeologists, and heritage organizations from around the world campaigned for decades to stop the project. Europa Nostra, one of Europe's leading cultural organizations, named Hasankeyf among the most endangered heritage sites on the continent. The World Monuments Fund placed it on its list of the 100 most endangered sites in the world. Legal challenges were filed at the European Court of Human Rights. All of them failed. Before the water rose, the government attempted to relocate some of the town's most prominent monuments. The Zeynel Bey Mausoleum, a cylindrical brick tomb decorated with turquoise tiles and built in the 15th century, was reinforced with a concrete shell, lifted from its foundation, and transported on a massive wheeled platform to a newly constructed cultural park on higher ground across the river. The Risk Mosque was similarly dismantled and moved. In total, 8 historical structures were relocated. 300 monuments were not. The Neolithic caves, the Roman fortress foundations, the medieval bathhouse, the Ottoman-era houses, the clifftop citadel, and the majority of the archaeological sites that had never been excavated were left in place. Only about 1/5 of the area's archaeological sites had been surveyed. Researchers estimated that 85% of what remained would be flooded before anyone could finish excavating. Local archaeologists said, not entirely as a joke, that it would have taken 500 years to uncover everything Hasankeyf had to offer. Over 200 of the Neolithic caves were filled in with rubble before the flooding, reportedly to prevent them from collapsing under water pressure and destabilizing the hillside. In one instance, a company was hired to blast a rock face with dynamite near the ancient citadel, damaging caves in the process. A Kurdish member of parliament chained himself to a rock to stop the demolition. It paused temporarily, then resumed. The human cost was measured alongside the archaeological one. The dam displaced the residents of 199 villages and settlements, the majority of them Kurdish. The Turkish government built a new town on higher ground across the river. Rows of identical concrete apartment blocks arranged in a grid and offered housing to displaced residents. But many could not afford the new apartments, which cost 2 to 3 times more than the compensation they received. According to one advocacy group, 2/3 of applicants for housing in New Hasankeyf were turned down. Some families whose ancestors had lived in the cliffs for generations were relocated to cities hundreds of kilometers away. Others received no compensation at all because they lacked formal land titles. One resident said his grandfather and grandmother had lived 55 years in a cave, then 45 years in the town, and then died on the same day. Their legacy, he said, would now be flooded. A local resident described the situation simply: if you pick a flower, it is no longer real. That is what they are doing to Hasankeyf. The workers who built the dam were, in many cases, the same people who lived in its shadow. Jobs were so scarce in the region that even residents who opposed the project signed up for construction work. One man who worked on the dam site for 2 years said plainly that if there had been any other work available, nobody would have chosen to help build something that would drown their own home. He said he had doubts about the structural quality of the concrete, suggesting that too much water had been mixed into the casing. The dam's project manager declined repeated requests for interviews about the construction. Downstream, the effects extended beyond Turkey's borders. Iraq, which depends on the Tigris for agriculture, drinking water, and the survival of the Mesopotamian marshes in its south, raised alarm about reduced flow. There are thousands of water refugees in Iraq every year, a former Iraqi human rights minister said, and the Ilisu Dam was expected to make the crisis worse. Turkey has refused to sign the United Nations Convention aimed at preventing conflicts between nations that share water resources. What makes this story different from every other video on this channel is the ending. In Rome, construction found ruins, and the ruins were preserved. In Crete, the airport hit a labyrinth, and the excavation continues. In Istanbul, the subway uncovered a Byzantine harbor, and the ships were extracted over 8 years. In every other case, the discovery led to delay, conflict, and eventually, some form of preservation. In Hasankeyf, the discovery was never in question. Everyone knew what was there. The site had been legally protected as a national conservation area since 1981. It had been studied, documented, and photographed. International organizations had cataloged its monuments. Archaeologists had been excavating it for decades. There was no moment of accidental discovery, no bulldozer striking something unexpected. The 12,000-year history of Hasankeyf was fully known, fully documented, and fully visible on the surface. They flooded it anyway. The reservoir now covers an area of 121 square miles. The water is expected to rise high enough to reach the upper balcony of the medieval minaret, one of the structures that was left in place. The ancient citadel on the cliff top remains above the waterline as a small island surrounded by the reservoir. The Turkish government has proposed boat tours to the citadel as a future tourist attraction. Beneath the water, the caves are sealed. The Roman foundations are submerged. The unexcavated sites, the 85% that no one had time to study, are gone. Whatever was in those cliffs, whatever artifacts, inscriptions, burials, and structural remains were left behind by 20 civilizations over 12,000 years, is now sitting at the bottom of a reservoir, deteriorating in conditions that no archaeological recovery effort can reverse. Hasankeyf is not the only place this has happened. Large dams have swallowed archaeological sites across the world for over a century. The Aswan High Dam in Egypt submerged the temples of Nubia in the 1960s, though an international campaign led by UNESCO relocated the most famous of them, Abu Simbel, to higher ground. The Three Gorges Dam in China inundated over 1,200 known archaeological sites and displaced more than 1 million people. But in both those cases, the international community was involved, funding was provided, and large-scale rescue operations were mounted before the water rose. At Hasankeyf, the international community was shut out. The Turkish government declined UNESCO recognition, rejected alternative dam proposals that would have spared the town, and proceeded with construction after every external funder withdrew. A team from Turkey's Middle East Technical University proposed 5 smaller dams along the same stretch of the Tigris that would have generated comparable power while leaving Hasankeyf completely above water. The government did not respond to the proposal. The dam is generating electricity. The new town is occupied, though many of its buildings sit empty. The cultural park with the relocated monuments is open, though visitors say it feels like a museum of disconnected objects rather than a living site. The Tigris downstream has seen reduced flow, raising concerns in Iraq about water security and the future of communities that depend on the river. Hasankeyf existed for 12,000 years. It survived the Assyrians, the Romans, the Mongols, the Ottomans, and 2 world wars. It did not survive a hydroelectric dam built in the 21st century by the government that was supposed to protect it. The cliffs are still there, rising above the waterline. The caves that are above the reservoir can still be seen. But the town at the base of the cliffs, the bridge across the river, the houses carved into the rock, the markets and bathhouses and mosques that made it a living place, not a museum, are beneath the surface. The earth did not hide Hasankeyf. The earth revealed it, held it in the open for 12,000 years, let 20 civilizations build on the same rock, and kept it visible for anyone who wanted to see it. It was the only site on this channel that never needed to be discovered. It needed to be saved, and it was not. Thanks for watching. If this is the kind of exploration you want to follow, subscribe. There is more to come.